What struck the Ali Salam Air Base in Kuwait was not simply a ballistic missile. What struck it was a demonstration, carefully calibrated, deliberately executed, that the architecture of American military deterrence in the Persian Gulf is operating under assumptions that no longer correspond to observable reality. The debris that injured 5 Americans, contractors and active duty personnel alike, and destroyed at minimum one MQ-9 Reaper drone valued at approximately $30 million is not the story. The story is what that debris reveals about the strategic condition of American power projection in a theater that Washington has long treated as settled. Let us begin with the weapon itself. The Fatah 110 is not a crude system. It is a solid-fueled, road-mobile ballistic missile with a circular error probable that has been progressively refined through Iranian indigenous development over roughly 2 decades. Kuwaiti air defenses intercepted the missile. This is the official framing. But what that statement obscures is more revealing than what it admits. Intercept, in the lexicon of missile defense, does not mean neutralized. It means the terminal phase of the projectile's trajectory was disrupted. The kinetic energy, the physical mass of the airframe, the fragmentation pattern of a destroyed ballistic missile at altitude, these do not vanish. They redistribute. And what redistributed onto the tarmac of Ali al-Salem was sufficient to injure Americans and render sophisticated drone platforms inoperable. This is not a minor operational footnote. This is a live demonstration of a fundamental truth about missile defense that American strategic planners have been reluctant to communicate publicly. Interception at altitude creates debris fields, and debris fields at a military installation are not a problem to be managed through press releases. Now consider the broader operational context in which this strike occurred. The United States military, through UK maritime trade operations as an intermediary, has issued notices to mariners and airmen operating in waters north of the Musandam Peninsula near Oman, the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz, warning of impending dangerous military activities. The stated rationale involves Iranian mine-clearing operations, or what is framed as addressing Iranian mines. This is significant on multiple levels that deserve careful examination, rather than the cursory treatment they have received in mainstream commentary, which is to say almost none. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a geographic choke point. It is the arterial passage through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply transits. Any military activity in those waters, whether it is American forces clearing Iranian mines, conducting reconnaissance, or positioning for potential strikes, represents an escalatory step whose second and third order consequences extend far beyond the immediate military calculus. Iran has invested substantially in its capacity to threaten this corridor, not because Iranian strategic planners believe they can permanently close the strait, but because they understand that the credible threat of disruption is itself a form of deterrence and leverage. Every American naval asset that enters those waters in a posture of operational preparation is simultaneously a demonstration of capability and an exposure of intent. And intent, once visible, constrains options. The destruction of Iranian air defense infrastructure, specifically the Sayad-based medium-range systems and the Hordad variants that emerged in post-strike imagery now circulating as internet access inside Iran is gradually restored, tells a more complicated story than the one being narrated in Washington. Yes, American strikes degraded Iranian air defense capacity in specific operational zones. This is real. But the strategic implication being drawn from this, that Iranian air defense is effectively neutralized, that the skies over Iran are open to American air power in ways that fundamentally alter the conflict's trajectory, runs directly into the evidence now emerging regarding the F-15 Strike Eagle that was shot down over southwestern Iran in April. This is where the analysis must become genuinely uncomfortable for anyone who has been following the mainstream narrative of this conflict. According to reporting from NBC News, citing multiple individuals with direct knowledge of the matter, the F-15 Strike Eagle, the first American fighter aircraft lost to enemy fire in decades, was most probably struck by a Chinese-manufactured, shoulder-launched surface-to-air missile. Read that sentence again and allow its implications to settle. A fourth-generation American fighter, operated by trained American aircrew, executing what American planners would have categorized as a manageable operational environment, was destroyed by a weapon system manufactured in the People's Republic of China and transferred to Iran. Furthermore, the same reporting indicates that China may have provided Iran with long-range early warning radar specifically designed to detect low observable or stealth-adjacent aircraft, systems intended to defeat the very technological advantages that American air campaign planning assumes as foundational. This is not a tactical anomaly. This is a strategic revelation of the first order, and the fact that it has not dominated the analytical conversation in Washington and in every serious defense publication is itself a datum worth examining. The United States is engaged in active combat operations against Iran. Iran is employing weapons systems supplied by China. The geometry of great power competition, the very framework that American strategic planners have been constructing for the past decade around the concept of integrated deterrence, is now being tested in real time, not in the theoretical space of war games and think tank seminars, but in the actual skies over southwestern Iran, where an F-15 was brought down and a pilot had to be recovered in what reporting describes as a dangerous rescue mission. The implication for American nuclear and conventional deterrence posture vis-à-vis China is not abstract. If Beijing has demonstrated willingness to provide Iran with man-portable air defense systems and long-range early warning radar during active hostilities with American forces, then several assumptions that underpin American strategic planning require immediate and serious reassessment. The first assumption is that Chinese support for adversaries in a conflict with the United States will be limited to diplomatic cover and economic lifelines. That assumption is now empirically compromised. The second assumption is that American air power, specifically fourth and fifth generation aircraft, operates in an environment where the sensor-to-shooter kill chain remains an American monopoly. The F-15 shoot-down and the radar systems reportedly provided by China begin to erode that assumption in ways that will not be recovered through rhetoric or through press releases from Central Command. Consider the industrial dimension of what is unfolding. The MQ-9 Reaper drone destroyed at Ali Salam represents $30 million of defense industrial capacity. It is not simply $30 million of financial loss. It is a unit of production capacity, a unit of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capability, a unit that requires manufacturing time, supply chain coordination, and industrial throughput to replace. The United States Defense Industrial Base, as has been extensively documented over the past 3 years in the context of Ukraine's support requirements, is operating under significant production constraints. The throughput of American precision munitions, the replacement cycles for complex platforms, the capacity of American shipyards and aerospace manufacturers to sustain attrition at rates that modern high-intensity conflict generates, these are not academic questions. They are operational realities that shape what options commanders actually have versus what options exist on planning documents. Iran, for its part, is doing something that Western analysts consistently underestimate. It is iterating. The Zolfarov 2, the latest development in the Iranian short-range ballistic missile family building on the Fatah architecture, reportedly achieves a range of 700 kilometers with what is described as very high terminal velocity. It was employed operationally in what reporting refers to as the 39-day war, meaning this conflict has already served as a live operational testing environment for Iranian missile development. Every engagement teaches. Every intercept attempt by American and allied air defense systems generates electronic emissions, reveals radar parameters, exposes engagement timelines. The Iranians are collecting this data in real time and feeding it into the development cycle of the next generation of systems. This is not speculation. This is how military technology development works when a nation is under existential pressure and has competent engineers. The nuclear dimension of these negotiations, and negotiations are ongoing even as missiles are in the air and American service members are recovering from injuries, reveals a contradiction at the heart of American strategy that no amount of rhetorical framing from the Pentagon or from the Secretary of Defense will resolve. The United States has stated as its non-negotiable objective that Iran must not acquire nuclear weapons capability. Iran has stated, including in the most recent reporting, that it will not surrender its enriched uranium stockpiles and will not alter the fundamental architecture of its nuclear program. These positions are not merely distant from one another, they are structurally incompatible in ways that cannot be bridged through diplomatic creativity alone. What Pete Hegseth communicated in his public remarks, that Iran must accept American terms or face the War Department, and that the United States is postured even more strongly today than it was at the outset, reflects a confidence in American coercive capacity that the observable evidence of this conflict is simultaneously undermining. American service members were injured by Iranian ballistic missiles in Kuwait. An American F-15 was shot down, the first in decades, by what appears to be Chinese-supplied weaponry. Iranian air defense, while degraded, retained sufficient capability to contest American air power in ways that were not fully anticipated in pre-conflict assessments. The Strait of Hormuz remains a contested zone where American military activity requires formal warning notices to international shipping. None of this constitutes Iranian victory in any conventional sense. Iran's losses in air defense infrastructure, in economic terms, in strategic isolation are real and significant. But the framing of American overwhelming dominance that has characterized public communication from Washington requires calibration against observable realities that tell a more complicated story. The idea that this conflict can be concluded on American terms through a combination of military pressure and negotiating leverage rests on an assumption that Iran's decision calculus will eventually bend under cumulative pressure. That assumption requires that Iran's leadership prioritize economic recovery and infrastructure restoration over the strategic goal of nuclear latency. Based on Iranian behavior over 4 decades, that is an assumption with a poor empirical track record. The broader geopolitical frame that surrounds this conflict is the one that deserves the most serious attention. China is providing weapons to Iran during active hostilities with American forces. Russia and China have, by multiple accounts, supplied Iran with air defense systems and support and technology throughout the period preceding this conflict. The Gulf states, while formally aligned with American security guarantees, are watching carefully as Iranian ballistic missiles strike installations on Kuwaiti soil and American drones are destroyed. The psychological impact of those strikes on regional calculations, on the private assessments being made in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Doha, is not captured in official statements of solidarity. It is captured in the quiet conversations about hedging, about the pace of their own weapons acquisition, about what American security guarantees actually mean when Iranian missiles are landing on Kuwaiti air bases. The Strait of Hormuz warning is perhaps the most consequential single development in this briefing, and it is the one receiving the least public attention. The United States military is preparing to conduct operations in the most economically sensitive maritime corridor on the planet. At a moment when global energy markets are already operating under significant stress, at a moment when the global economy is navigating structural fragilities that did not exist during previous Gulf conflicts. A miscalculation in the strait, a minefield that takes longer to clear than anticipated, a naval engagement that escalates beyond its intended parameters, a Chinese or Russian vessel that finds itself in proximity to American naval activity and generates a diplomatic incident could cascade into economic and geopolitical consequences that dwarf the immediate military objectives being pursued. What is unfolding in the Persian Gulf is not simply an American-Iranian conflict. It is a stress test of the entire post-Cold War security architecture. The architecture premised on American military primacy, on the assumption that American air power and naval dominance could manage any regional adversary without drawing great power competitors into active material support for those adversaries. That architecture is being tested, and the test results emerging from the debris fields of Ali al-Salem and the wreckage of an F-15 over southwestern Iran suggest that the architecture is performing below specification in ways that Washington has not yet fully communicated to the public it governs. The situation as of today is this: Americans are injured, drones are destroyed, an American fighter has been shot down by Chinese-supplied weapons. Iranian missiles continue to fly. The Strait of Hormuz is the site of impending military operations whose scope and duration remain undefined. Negotiations continue toward an outcome that neither side's stated positions make structurally achievable. And the great power competition that American strategic planners have been theorizing about for a decade is now generating observable real-world consequences in the form of Chinese weapons killing American aircraft. The gap between the public narrative and the operational reality of this conflict is not a minor discrepancy. It is a chasm. And chasms of that kind in the history of great power competition have a tendency to widen before they narrow.